All right, well, thank you all for joining us today. Our presentation is firsthand experience with wildland fires. Our format is quite different than any of our previous ones. It's going to be set up more as a Q&A session, and we've invited Brent Escoubas, that name may be familiar to you. He is currently the Director of Risk Control of Jackson Family Wines in Santa Rosa, California. Brent has over 26 years of experience, including both commercial enterprise and insurance organizations. Tim Leech, who you see up here as well, is the Director of Risk Control Consulting at Alliant, and he will be moderating the session. I'm now going to turn the program over to Tim and to Brent.
Thanks, Christy.
Thanks, Christy.
Well, yeah, Brent, man, I always think of in 2010, when I started considering coming to Alliant, I had two things to thank for. I had Brent Escoubas and cycling, because Brent actually interviewed me for the position that would be his boss, and then we had this common interest of, and not boss, that's kind of we were more team members.
Co-workers.
Yeah, co-workers. But at any rate, and we had cycling, so we made sure that we had a mission in the department that we gave Christy an out, but anybody that we would bring on board would have to be a cyclist. Of course, we've kind of gone away from that. But Brent and I remained, created a friendship and remained friends and have some common interests. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day.
My pleasure.
And doing this for us, Brent. I just feel like there's always a lot to be learned from past events, and rather than go into the technology or every technical aspect in a kind of a structured training, I thought it would be good to do a lessons learned. And I thought of Brent because I knew what they were accomplishing at Jackson Family Wines, and all you wine drinkers can thank Brent and the team out there to keep you supplied with your your favorite beverage, I guess.
I'm doing my best to keep the shelf stocked.
Yeah. So Brent, the wildfire situation, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about some of the experiences, if you can go into it a little bit, some of the past experiences over the year or two, and what you guys have done at Jackson Family Wines.
Yeah, and a lot's happened since I've left Alliant and other endeavors. But really, this all started from a Jackson Family Wine standpoint with the 17 fire. That was before my time at Jackson Family Wines. But those of you that live in California, especially Northern California in particular, and Southern for that matter, I mean, unfortunately, wildfires are a part of life now. And the 2017 event, that was my first real, on a personal level, wildfire that came that close. I'd lived in Southern California for 15 some years and have been up in Northern California for pushing 8 years now. But that was the first time that I was actually evacuated from my home and really saw the impact of what a wildfire can do to a community. And I joined Jackson Family Wines it'll be 2 years in October. And when I started, I was supposed to start in October of 19, and our main bottling facility in Santa Rosa was evacuated due to fires. And anyways, the organization said, hey, this is something we're going to have to live with. We don't have the luxury of moving our vineyards to another state or another location. So what do we need to do to help control some of the wildfire aspects of it? And part of, really beginning in 17, the family and our managers, directors, executives said, hey, what are we going to do to, still make wine, protect the livelihood of the employees here, and not have, reduce our losses. So that's really where it got to. And after the 2019 fire, we decided to have our own fire brigade. There's resources are very limited in California, especially during a fire event, a wildfire event in particular. And the experience that Jackson Family Wines had over the last few years, we have a good relationship with Cal Fire and the local agencies, but they're just limited on resources. Unfortunately, when we have fires, other states have fires, those firefighters are deployed to either Cal Fire, National Forest Service, private fire brigades. And so we hired a company called Firestorm. They're out of Chico, Northern California, and they helped us manage some fuel reduction pieces and things like that. And then in the meantime, they trained a handful of us. We had 12 people on the fire team, about 12 people beginning in 2020, went through wildfire fighting training, the S-130 class, and 40 plus hours of classroom time, and another, weeks, months of on-site hands-on training with our fire team. And we formed a local fire brigade for our private property. We're not out putting all the fires out in the neighborhood and whatnot, but that was one way we looked at, hey, how are we controlling this risk? We'll give our team, some qualified persons in our organization, some training on how to hopefully reduce some wildfire spread on our property. And again, we're strictly wildfire. We're not dealing with anything structural. So a little bit later, we can get into kind of how we manage the equipment and train persons and what that looks like today, about a year and a half later. But really, it was a business decision that the organization made to say, hey, we're going to live with this. We love Northern California. We have wineries in Oregon and in Central Coast between Santa Barbara and Monterey as well. So all these can be affected by climate change and wildfire. And we, fortunately, we have the means to, build a team, buy equipment and things like that. And what, throughout the talk today, hopefully I can, kind of give you some insights on what I saw, how fire behavior, what really worked on from a wildfire management standpoint, and how that kind of interfaced with urban area, the urban interface, urban wildlife interface, or wildfire interface, what I saw personally there from fire behavior, and then what persons are doing, not only on a commercial level, but maybe even a local level on your personal home that I saw.
So Brent,
successful.
What was your first fire that you guys had to enact the fire brigade? And since you've been there, was it the glass fire or?
Yeah, it was the glass fire in that. Don't quote me on the dates, but I want to say that was in September of last year. So in between, after we went through our firefighter training in the spring, we hit some small grass fires and things like that, just as practice or prescribed burns to get comfortable running equipment, using tools and things like that, and had some very, very, very good training from firefighters. We weren't doing this on our own. We were the fire brigade that we hired, fire team that we hired, Firestorm. They were really instrumental in. They were our team leaders, kind of like a military command, just keeping things in check, radio traffic. They're our liaison to Cal Fire, the local emergency services. And so we had experience working on small fires, but the glass fire was really the one where it got real. And those of you familiar with Northern California and the Napa and Sonoma County, we have a winery called Freemark Abbey, which is right outside of St. Helena, in between St. Helena and Calistoga. And we had our crews positioned in various locations throughout the valley, the Napa and Sonoma valleys, and really looking for spot fires. And one thing I realized, fairly quickly during that glass fire event, my initial deployment or station was at a vineyard very high elevation outside of Calistoga, and the job is looking for spot fires, looking for the direction of fire spread, and then radioing that incident into emergency services or control or emergency patrol, and helping deploy other resources to that. And watching fire behavior from afar live shows you how quickly it can expand. And so the glass fire we were on the glass fire for maybe a week or so. It all runs together, but we hit some real fires right outside of Freemark Abbey during the storm. And I saw quick quickly how spot fires can happen, how boots on the ground really make a difference in these wildfires.
So for those that may not be aware, what are kind of the components and functions of the fire brigade, as far as whether it be positional or equipment and that sort of thing? How is it structured?
So we have we have a variety of fire engines from mostly a handful of type 6 engines that carry about 400 gallons of water, and then some various stuff. And I have some slides on this later for those that are curious. But our primary objective is to determine if there's risk to our property. So we'll be stationed in various areas. And to kind of step back a little bit, what we did after the fires starting in 17, we got back to, I guess I'd call it the basics of risk management. I would say, hey, what do we have at risk? So we look at our portfolio and basically said, hey, here's a map of everything we have. So actually, I have a couple things here. It might help a little bit. So here's just some examples of where our wineries are spread around, the state and primarily Northern California, and said, hey, okay, we know these properties, really what's going on here from a wildfire management standpoint. And we just determined which wineries were most at risk for wildfire. And we said, hey, what do we need to do to reduce that risk, and what risk is acceptable to us? And either did fuel reduction on those various sites, but even with fuel reduction, we knew that they can be at risk during a wildfire. So that's where our fire team was deployed. So there's about 5-6 wineries and vineyards that we decided, hey, these are really highly susceptible to fire based upon history and what we know about the topography. And we put people on that land. And we're fortunate enough that we have the ability to put people, we have a lot of land, and we can put people in very good locations to see where prevailing winds are going, what the fire behavior might be doing, and deploy people accordingly to that observed behavior. So the goal of the fire team is really, we will put out spot fires and help control small gas fires, but we're not putting out, structural fires or anything like that. Now, that being said, if any of you have been on a wildfire, you will know that it can grow fairly quickly. But part of the wildfire training will tell you how to help contain that fire and keep it from spreading to adjacent properties or some structures. So that's really our objective, is to put out spot fires, help control the fire, and really the professionals, CAL FIRE, National Forest Service, whoever is on site during that named event will really do the rest. And during the glass fire, we did get pulled in to some CAL FIRE teams and things like that, and you really take their direction based upon that. But we're really rookies, and there was a handful of us that had some firefighting experience, but we were cutting fire line around active fires, and then running fire hoses and doing all that, really to working with the neighbors and trying to prevent the fire spread to the region. So again, our goal is really just to identify risk within our properties that are vulnerable to wildfire. And if we do have an event, obviously notify the proper authorities first, and then depending on where they are or how thin they're spread, take their direction or control the fire on our own means by using basic wildfire fighting techniques, which is creating fire lines, using hose streams to pre-wet fire. There's some other pre-wet fuels, reduce fuels through chainsaw. Part of the evolution of our fire team, we realized, is that, hey, we don't have a lot of skill set in chainsaw use. And so the original fire team, about 10 of us went through chainsaw training. So we're level 3 fallers, which is kind of the basic faller. So we can literally legally cut down trees in a named fire event. But if somebody of a higher fall level is above us and on the crew, so those type of things evolved from us as an organization and more training. But
So how, as far as involvement and work with CAL FIRE, are you doing things pre-season with them? Any training, any tactical stuff, or do they just call on you when an incident occurs?
Yeah, no real other than maybe a prescribed burn. You know, we want our local emergency services to know what kind of equipment and training we have locally. So they're always invited, and they have attended some of our local trainings and things like that, which I feel is extremely important. And again, it makes them comfortable knowing what we have and what kind of where our skill set lies. You know, we're not full. We all have other jobs here, and it's so having the local fire and county fire responding fire teams know that is extremely important, because I would never want them to have a false sense of security thinking, oh, you know, Jackson Family Wines has this whole fire brigade, let them handle it. And not that they would, but and we do work with them on the equipment. We do work with them on access, so they know our properties, they know where hydrants are, ins and outs, and I have some examples of, you know, some administrative tools that we put together based upon on this as well. But I do think that is important. If you do have properties that are risk to wildfire, is to share that knowledge with the first responders, whatever that might look like. And, you know, especially if you have properties that are in a very remote location with select ins and outs, you know, the fire department during a named event, it may not even be a local fire that's responding. One thing I quickly found out, I was working on the fire line with people from Nevada and Oregon, and had never been to Northern California before. They had no idea about any of these street names and road names and where they even were. And great firefighters, but one thing you can't always expect is that the responding wildfire unit is going to know your property, and they may not even be local. And
Right.
so it is best for you to have somebody call it an incident command, that is in charge, even if you don't have a fire brigade or fire team. And most people, most organizations, I would suspect, don't have this. But even if you don't, you know, having somebody with the local knowledge of that property is huge, especially
Yeah.
knowing, you know, where water sources are. Maybe they have to draft out of a pond or a swimming pool or some water tank that's really not for fire water, but how do I get into that? And maybe you have a fire pump on the side. How do they might need that to get some pressure to the hydrants, you know, so how does
So
all that work?
So as part of your effort leading into it, you're identifying those resources, right, for the particular property as far as where you might have access to water, whether it be naturally or.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And actually, I'll show you up here. Can you see the slide here we have of kind
The
of this top?
pre-2020 fire season?
Yeah, the 2020
Yeah.
fire. So that's exactly what we did. So, and again, these are just really lessons learned from, you know, it's great that we have a fire team, but ideally we don't want to fight a fire. And, you know, and leave it to the professionals. And we've had 4 events on our properties this year so far, mostly grass fires, small grass fires that were either done by mowing, the neighbor, not necessarily our cause, but our team did respond. And what we realized is, hey, the firefighters, let's leave this to them. But we need to give them the tools to be successful in these properties they're not aware of, as I alluded to earlier. And so we developed these, I call them pre-attack maps. And that basically says, you know, if you look at this slide, this is kind of how we did a risk assessment of the properties. It basically said, so Hartford Family Winery is one of our brands, our wineries, and it's in Forestville. If anybody's familiar with Santa Rosa, Windsor area, Forestville is kind of West County, very dense, not as populated, which what makes it great to visit and great for wine growing. Lots of agriculture over there, so it's very forested. And this by far is probably one of our more vulnerable properties in West County. And so we said, hey, what's really here? How do we access the property? And we just started drawing lines on the paper. You know, we have a GIS division that maps all our vineyards for agricultural reasons. So we have that luxury of already having some of this really good detail of property lines and access points to that. But nonetheless, you can still use like a Google Maps. Are so great now. They may not have the newest structures on there, depending on how when you pulled your map or built up your infrastructure, but you can overlay that with any type of drawings, and anything is better than nothing. But we basically just said, hey, if we have to access this property, where do we go? And then we took it to the next level, and this one doesn't have QR codes on it, but the image to the right kind of shows topography there, main access roads, private residence. So it gives the firefighters responding team an idea of what to expect there. So we know, hey, here's our primary winery, right? Here's where we go. This even evolved even further. We put in, weight limits of bridges and widths and things like that, so they know if they need to have a certain type engine that comes in there that's safe to drive over, or it has the capacity, or it can pass. If not, then they know to take another route. So these type of tools, I feel were very valuable to us, not only from an internal life safety standpoint to get our persons and guests off the property, and to know where to access if the primary routes are closed, because we have some of these wineries have a lot of visitors. If you've ever been wine tasting up here, people kind of just meander the roads. It's a little different now than COVID, and just pull into a winery, they don't even know where they are. And something like this can help a local person that might work in the winery. They may not even know where these access roads are. So we really tailored this primarily for firefighting, but also found that to be helpful internally as part of our emergency plans as well. So this drawing here, and we have these for all of our primary identified wildfire areas or vulnerable wineries and vineyards, that says, hey, this is where you would access this. This is how you go. Here's water here. Here's a connection. Here's a hydrant. This building's sprinkled. This one's not. This is a residence. This is how many people should you expect to be here. And up in these all have tags for the names of it. So the person responding knows what's on this property. So we drop these off with local fire, the expected fire departments that would respond to these facilities. And also, this one doesn't have a QR code on it, but they have a QR code on it, goes in the Knox box. Maybe this gets pulled out. So if we have service, somebody can click on the QR code, this map will come in. Because as I mentioned before, it may not even be the local fire department responding to this fire. It could be somebody from out of state. So at least it gives them some sort of tool to say, hey, this is where I should go. Oh, here is an out. Because one of the first things they teach you in firefighting, wildfire fighting, is to always have an exit route. Where's your safe zone? Where's the exit route?
Yeah, which is actually good in anything. Using a fire extinguisher, folks, it's have an exit route.
It really is the same concept, except the stakes are a little higher from something in a small incipient stage, right? Versus the whole forest on fire. But nonetheless, the safety is always drilled into it first to your safety when you're on a fire line. And so you always have a fire. Where's my safe zone, and where's the exit route? And maybe there's more than one. So, and when you're on an incident, it's very important that somebody is in charge of that and knows where those routes and or alternate routes are, because it changes constantly. It can change constantly during an event, because the fire it just goes where it wants to go. So, but this type of thing at least gives us a tool internally to know, hey, what, maybe we should have an easement here with a neighbor to access our property. Some things that we just looked at the property a little differently and said, maybe we do need more fuel reduction done here over the next X amount of years, right? And what does that look like, and how do we share that cost maybe with a neighbor or neighbors, because we're all in this together. And part of this also, we realize, is like getting to know your neighbors in these rural areas are extremely important. And we all kind of know who they are in the commercial world, but there's a lot of second homes up in these areas, and some of the fuel management isn't done well. How can we help support that or complement that with our neighbors in these vulnerable areas?
Your neighbors, though, it's not necessarily like you have another vineyard of a competitor that borders your property, right? It's all residents and that sort of thing, or?
Well, it could be both. It could be both.
Okay.
So I mean, yes, there's a lot of vineyards around it, but some of it just could be forest that nope
yeah.
that this a park or is managed by somebody else, and a combination of everything.
Have those other commercial neighbors, have they as invested as much or as you, maybe like another winery, another grower, or are
Um,
they?
the answer is it depends.
Mhm.
Some a lot of smaller wineries don't necessarily have the means to have a fire brigade,
Sure.
but they definitely will work with us on have worked with us on access to the property, especially during an event. There was
Yeah.
nobody that we called upon neighbor wise that did not give us access to. They opened gates, access to water, whatever we needed to get to the place, because they understand. I mean, fires aren't new to Northern California, and people that have been here a while really understand the risk of that, and they're more than welcome to have us there, because we're helping the community as well. As much as we're not going to go to a neighbor's place, if we're not going to be on call like a fire department, right?
Right.
But we understand that, hey, if we don't control the fire, if it did start on our property, it could spread to our neighbors. That's one thing, and vice versa. We might have a neighbor that's had a small grass fire that can get to our property, and we need to not only help control that, but we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And it's coming, especially in Northern California, Napa, Sonoma in particular. The community is really coming together on working with each other on how to do this. And again, some organizations have the means, some don't. And again, but just in the short time I've been here, I've seen a lot of progress community-wise, on working together and giving that access to not really competitors, but people that can help make a difference during a wildfire.
So getting back to, say, the glass fire, the thing that comes to mind is that, I know that your home was threatened and you guys had to evacuate, at least maybe not in the glass fire, but I know the previous one, when you weren't
Mhm.
at Jackson Family Wine. I know last year I live in Southern California. If I would have crossed the street, I would have had to evacuate from the Irvine area fire. Of course, I wasn't on a fire brigade, but how's the communication go and balance so that someone that maybe they have a personal residence and their family needs to to get out of town, so to speak? How's that communication flow and balance between, hey, you have a job to do, but you also need to take care of your family? How did that work?
Yeah, so during the glass fire, my neighborhood was evacuated as well, and fortunately, we have family that lived in San Francisco, and so my wife and kids went down there. But department-wise, there's nobody on our fire team. Family comes first. So if we, I helped the family evacuate, and then once they were safe, I went back on the fire line. So that's kind of
But do you
how
guys
we
have a system, communication
manage
system
that internally.
internally?
Yeah. So yeah, during the last couple of years, we used a variety of methods for notification of employees, and that was text, email, the traditional type of things. And now we're using what's called SendWord now, and it works kind of a three-way system. You get a phone call, a text, or an email, or well, you get all of the above, and then you respond accordingly. And the system will say, "Hey, oh, hey, Brent's okay." So the text will go out and it will say, "Hey, there's an emergency at this property. You need to evacuate. Don't come in. Whatever the peril might be." And then that person can respond, "I got the message." However if they want to call, that's great. If they want to email, if they want to text, that's great too. And non-response means we assume that person is either out of service, the phone's off, or we have to assume that person isn't accounted for, and then that takes it to the next level. So what's great about SendWord now is that we can do that on a local level. So each one of our facilities has called a manager that can send out that information to the people assigned that are working at that winery at the time, or the vineyard at that time, and as well as our subcontractors that might be on site. So it's kind of getting to again, basics of risk management. Hey, if we have an event, how do I notify those people? So that's the first tier. And then there's traditional sign-in sheets and things like that. For guests that we have at our tasting operations, we, one advantage from thinking as a risk manager of that, it's mostly, there's very few walk-ins anymore. And so people have to have reservations, right? So we know the head count of the persons that might be in a tasting room. So that helps us also from an evacuation standpoint to know, hey, we have, 10 people here and we need to get with the employee count, we know how many people that we need to be accounted for on the site. So that's how we're managing it now. And that was more, I would say, a part of the lessons learned over evacuations and PSPSs of the last few years that we've gotten better at. And that's one of those things where you just have to train to it. And, the spring and summer is when we usually do our evacuation drills at our properties, and usually before harvest and sometimes during harvest too if we have new employees. But nonetheless, we practice that. So employees are used to seeing what that means when they get a text or an email and then respond, what kind of language worked better. And it's in English and Spanish. And, so people can respond to that. So we're still working through that as an organization on what's too much, what's too little. We also have in our on our homepage, our intranet, there's all these resources for wildfire that you can go to locally for just basic information on what to do for your personal home evacuation for family. But there's links and stuff to local fire resources, where California and Oregon and what have you. And then regionally, you can drill down regionally, put these apps on your phone and things like that. So our IT and marketing team has done a really good job of putting these type of things together for employee knowledge. Does every employee use this? No, but managers, supervisors are all aware of this, and they can direct employees to this type of thing or shoot it to them on a local level.
Yeah. I know in the preparation, we talked a little bit about kind of, creating defensible space and the things that you need to do to reduce fuel load. Have you run into any issues with protected species of, vegetation, trees, things like that?
Yeah.
And, how do you work through that? And if you can't remove them, since what's some of the things that you do to mitigate the situation?
Yeah, there's a lot of protected trees. I realized in California, it's not really my forte, but like manzanita is a great tree and beautiful, and nobody wants to harm it. Same way with these oaks, California oaks and things like that, amazing trees. So to answer that question in general is we create defensible space around that tree if necessary.
Okay.
So if there's a grove of manzanita and it's not really in harm's way of a structure or an exit or something like that, just create a defensible space throughout that forest. Or again, it's very dependent on what that tree grove looks like, but you can create a very manageable forest on a small scale. Doing this for thousands of acres would be very difficult, but we probably wouldn't be cutting down all these California oaks anyways. So nonetheless, but we definitely have some of those protected species, and you just protect them. You can still maintain the tree. If it's dead limbs, you can still maintain the tree with an arborist and things like that nature. So that's number one. How do we maintain this tree so it's less of a fire hazard? And then the undergrowth around it, and then defensible space around it, similar to the structure. So it doesn't always happen that way, and it's kind of out of my world as far as getting how can we legally cut down this tree or move it. We have another team that can handle that, but in general, we definitely want to keep the forest as natural as possible, but there are some cases where maybe we do have to get approval to have it removed. If not, hey, let's make it as defensible as we can.
So when you have a situation, let's say a structure, it's exposed, and that there's potential, a wildfire potentially can, envelop the structure. What are some of the things you do, like we talked about some of the thermal gels and things like that. What was your experience with those? Maybe you can explain a little bit of what they are to the audience who might not be familiar,
Yeah.
and you know, how effective are they?
Yeah, so we let me find a slide here. So here's kind of a quick snapshot of our equipment that we have and some of the training photos and stuff like that. But these, when I say fire engines, I mean, we have a handful of Type 6 fire engines that are dedicated strictly just for wildfire fighting and fire control. But we bought these fire skids. They're between 85 and 200 gallons. May have a couple 300-gallon ones that go on larger trucks, but we put these fire skids into the back of a pickup truck. And one thing I will tell people is if you decide to go this route, make sure your weight limits of your vehicles meet this. Water weighs a lot, so especially the skid
8 pounds
alone,
a
like
gallon.
yeah, exactly. And again, you don't want to create another hazard by driving these overweight vehicles down the road, right? Because you're always in a hurry, so nonetheless, just note to self, another lesson learned, right? Make sure you have it in the appropriate vehicle. But we put these fire skids onto the back of a pickup, F-250s and whatnot, and so those were deployed. And in that we have these fire tools and gels and things like that. So the bottom right pictures is a fire tool, or the fire tools that we have on every truck, either all these or a combination thereof. And what these are is this is what you use to cut a fire line. So when I say cut a fire line, you have the simplest description of that is you have a grass fire and it's meandering slowly, develop, hey, you have a expectation of where it's going to grow to. So you have to remove the fuel from that grass fire to help control the spread, right? And you do that by cutting a fire line, which is 2 to 4 feet wide. You get down to the dirt, and these tools do that. So they just look like shovels and hoes, and they basically are. They're modified. They're very sharp. You can cut roots with these things. The shovel itself has a sharper blade. It's angled differently, has a heavier weight, so you can kind of swing it like a golf club or a baseball bat. So they're not just your typical off-the-shelf Home Depot tools. Those will work in a pinch, but these are dedicated fire tools that are in every fire engine that we have. Obviously, first aid and stuff like that. We have these water packs. If you can see this kind of yellow pack over here, that's 5 gallons of water that you'll wear on your back in addition to all your fire gear and these tools, so you can help control a fire and create a defensible space for yourself if you get in trouble. But these are on everything. So, and that in addition to these water trucks or these water tanks, these Q-Tacs, we have a lot of tools on you or accessible to you, and these are running off, and these pumps can run either 3/4 inch hose, which is like a garden hose, or up to whatever size we want based upon the connections we have there. So we can run just typical fire hose on there and actually help control the fire, create a fire break to help control the spread. So that's really the most effective way that we found there for the topography and fuels that we have on our vineyards to help control the fire. And so what happens is when we're on the fire line, if you're cutting your fire line, you have all these tools available to you. Water is obviously key. It's extremely important to have enough water and know when your water source is for that, because depending on the truck you have with you, you may only have 85 gallons, and trust me, it goes extremely quick. You can empty that tank in 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how much you're spraying. So how do I keep getting water to the site? But what happens during these wildfires is it creates its own weather pattern. And when we were stationed at Freemark Abbey at the beginning of the glass fire, I'm on the roof and we're just keeping an eye out. It's kind of this surreal moment. It's like in a movie. It's except you're living it, and you can see fire just being picked up and moved across the street. So it's where nothing else is burnt, and all of a sudden these spot fires occur, up the hill, and we radio that in and have somebody look at it. But these type of tools with either backpack pumps, hand tools, and portable fire tanks, fire pumps can really control those spot fires that come out. And was where we were very successful in controlling, the spread of fire and helping contain it at our own direction or with the assistance of Firestorm and CAL FIRE. So that's really the boots on the ground that makes a difference. The structures that we saw that burnt did not have boots on the ground. And it's something to kind of think about too, as you're going through your risk assessment of vulnerabilities in your property portfolio. There's this expectation in general from a structural firefighting standpoint, right? That, hey, local fire will respond and they will put out the fire if my building catches on fire. And that's probably the case in an urban area. In a rural area during a named fire event, they may not show up. And like I said before, it could be somebody from another state or wherever, not familiar with your property. But they're so spread thin during the summer, all the firefighting resources in the West, that there's just not enough people to respond. So the the homes and the other wineries, agricultural buildings that we saw burn during the glass fire didn't have the boots on the ground. There's no doubt in my mind that we saved several of our personal wineries because we had somebody to put out a small fire. I mean, you literally see these fires that show you're standing there, watching the land and the weather patterns, and somebody spotting, hey, spot fire a quarter mile up to the left off this road. You go check it out. It's not very big. You just put a hose on it and a fire tool, and it's done. If we didn't have that ability to do that, who knows where those fires would have spread to? And that was really, I think, the big difference this year for us as it was last year. We didn't lose any major buildings, some outer buildings like sheds and stuff like that. They're way below the deductible anyways. And trust me, we'd rather pay for a $2,000, maintenance shed to burn down than these $1 million wineries. So it really did make a difference. And I saw what that meant compared to previous years. And again, neighboring wineries, neighboring structures within St. Helena and the regions in Napa, they did a great job at fuel reduction. But the wind doesn't care. The wind is going to take those branches and throw them anywhere on fire. I mean, again, I'm sitting. We're doing some fuel reduction work at Freemark Abbey last year in the back, and I'm standing there using one of these, fire shovels, and it's literally raining fire on me. And we're there putting that stuff out. I mean, if we had not been there, I don't need. It's a high density of really nice homes, second homes, and hotels. Who knows what would have happened? Again,
So,
not here to say, hey, we're so great, but that boots on the ground made a huge difference to at least where I was and our fire team was during the glass fire event.
So is it fair to say that an organization that maybe doesn't have the depth of resources such as Jackson Family Wines does, that you have maybe a modified, I don't even know if you would call it a brigade, but someone, that could do that in the event that spot fires took place in the vicinity of the buildings? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think even private firefighting teams or the insurance world, especially on the personal lines, that's been around for a while, right?
Mhm.
And that's kind of where we have the idea of the thermogel, right? Or there's various brands of that before, but they're really some of those groups. If you are going to work with them, just make sure that they actually are firefighters and just not somebody spraying water on your house or structure. But the answer is yes. If you have the means to have a professional firefighting team on your property and even roaming, it will at least give your property a fighting chance to help control the fire spread or hopefully reduce or eliminate to spread to a structure. The other advantage too, and I do want to talk about the fire drill and flash check too briefly, but is most people think most of the firefighting is done during the fire. And that's true. That's kind of, call it the sexy part where you're on the flames and you're in the smoke and putting out fire and your adrenaline is going crazy. But most of the work, about 8% of it, is called mop up. The fire gets under control or contained. And then what they don't show you on the news is the mop up. where you methodically walk through this land. It's called the black. It's all burnt. You're walking through the black and you're checking every square foot for heat. And then you're taking fire pump, these hoses, these fire tools, you're digging. You back of your hand, you feel it with the back of your hand. If the ground is warm, maybe there's a root that's still burning, a stump that's underground that we don't know of. All these chips that have been spread over the years, they're 2 feet deep and now there's spontaneous combustion under there, or they burn. Fire will find a way to burn. And the mop up piece of it, having your own crew on your own property can do that. They can. So we go out and mop up. We'll spend 3 to 4 days to a week or more mopping up, where we may have only spent a half a day on the fire, because a lot of times, I think it was 2019 fire. Maybe don't quote me on the time. They all run together, which is really sad. But we had a fire that was under control at one of our wineries, was put out by fire. It's by the fire department or responding fire unit, and it's flared up again and burnt down the winery. They controlled the fire, had it contained, but it didn't do mop up. There's just no resources. They have other fires to go to, right? So the mop up is more important than the fire in some cases, right? Obviously, we don't want the fire to spread, but going through methodically, it's literally it's a hard job. And you have a chainsaw with you, and you're clearing trees, you're cutting roots, you're digging down. You have to find the source of that fire, or it will happen again. And we during the glass fire outside of St. Helena up Spring Mountain Road, we had that exact same thing occur. About 2 weeks after the fire was under control, everything's kind of getting back to normal. Some old trees that were used as a road years ago were on fire. Nobody knew it. We had one of our hired fire persons, they fell in this hole that was on fire. Fortunately, he's okay. He did get some burns, but the ground was on fire, and that's what mop up does. It goes through and identifies those hot spots and puts them out for controlling it again. So the other tools we have, I mean, that's most important aspect of after a wildfire is the mop up part, and make sure that's done correctly. And you just can't do it quickly.
No, I was going to say, so just so you know, we have about 10 minutes. So I thought I've interrupted the flow a little bit. So
that's great.
I just want to let you know. So if there's some things that you really want to hit on, it would be good to do that at this point.
Yeah, just a couple things. I want to talk about this gel. There's several versions out here. There's this fire gel, thermogel. We used that on one of our structures last year just as a precaution. And if anybody has any questions on this, how this works real life, you can let me know later. I'm happy to give you a call or email or what have you. But it works. It works. However, it's extremely difficult to clean up, and it's really a last ditch effort. So don't think this is the end all be all. You're going to spray this gel on your house or your building or whatever. It works really well in vegetation. Not that it doesn't work well on a structure, but it's like walking on slime, wet ice. It's extremely slippery, and extremely difficult to get off. So use that as an absolute last resort. Fire's inevitable to hit the structure, spray it on, then get out of there. And that's one thing that we learned. Fortunately, we were smart enough to try it just on some small parts of this building. It did stop the vegetation from burning. The building didn't burn, but it did stop vegetation fires from burning. So if I had my choice, I would probably say, hey, use this mostly on vegetation and last ditch effort on a building. And it'll take off like finishes and things of that nature. This year we are working. We're going to start. We have frost check that we're trying in some small locations. It's a little more they're both fairly environmentally friendly, but the frost check, you can color it to know what's been sprayed. And you can see that's what PG&E uses, some sort of a similar device, and they usually spray their poles pink or red or whatever color to know that it's been hit with the frost check. So we're doing that, but again, I nothing really. It's if you have risk that are properties that are vulnerable to fire, you have to get back to the basics, understand what's at risk and what's your risk tolerance. Because I mean, we live in a world where the wildfires is really affecting our ability to buy insurance. So our deductibles are way different last year, and we're doing our best to kind of make sure that we are protecting our properties the best we can. And as far as, through this, we've learned, hey, we need more people on the team and more people with specialties on the team. I literally could talk all day about what we learned, but something that we also identified was, we have stock in these properties too, and we have a vulnerable product, whether it's wine that's in process or finished product that's vulnerable to heat. And people on our fire team have specialties in running pumps, running HVAC, running security, and running equipment that if we didn't have those people on the team, then we would have lost millions of dollars in stock from high temperatures of our wine cellars or what was in process ready to be fermented, go through primary fermentation during the harvest process. So we, we're all firefighters, but what I didn't realize was how important it was to have somebody on these emergency response teams that knew the facility, knew the land, and really knew the infrastructure of the winery itself. Because I had no idea how to turn on the HVAC of a winery. I can run the fire pump and I can shut the sprinkler system on and off, but I don't know how to do that. If it wasn't for people on our team that knew that, we would have lost that. So, again, we part of our risk assessment identified that as an organization and said, hey, we need these type of skill sets on our team, and also what locations will be out of power. So as a blanket statement, we just assume everything in Northern California will be out of power at some point during fire season, right? Which unfortunately that usually falls within our harvest. And so we've either, where it makes sense, we've either put generators in our buildings that can run the entire facility, which includes climate control and some of our key processes. We have wine, coming right out of harvest, and or develop or rented equipment for all those locations. So part of our job during the fire brigade was actually filling diesel tanks and filling up generators so we're protecting our product. And that's something you're not going to get with a private fire team. Now, maybe a private fire team, they could do that because you could familiarize them with the local property. But, I was really proud of the way that Jason Majors, our security manager, and our other people have put together the fire team on a diversity of skill sets, being out there and really not only controlling the fire, but really protecting our internal assets and our people that were in our wineries.
Hey, Brent. We have a couple of questions that have come through, and I thought that maybe in the last 5-7 minutes, if you could address the questions. Christy, I know that you have those. Did you want to?
Yes, one of them came in from John. He was asking, do you utilize the FM 919 data sheet as a guide for wildfire property conservation?
Yes, I've looked at them. We've looked at them all. And from a code compliance standpoint, we really use that FM and NFPA as a guideline, as well as other fire resources. There's a lot of fire resources out there, but what we found was we really had to customize those to specifically to that winery or the vineyard or whatever we're trying to protect. Now, that being said, another thing that came out of this was, hey, we're talking about external fire to a property, right? Where I do rely heavily on FM and NFPA is the other aspects of fire, structural fire. So I quickly realized, like, well, hey, is there water in this fire tank, during a fire, and why isn't it being full? So what standard can help me maintain stuff up to code? And far as is the fire pump running? Do I have the right connections on these remote tanks? And if I have to run this in an emergency, will it work? So that's helped us give some priority to our internal fire systems, and as well as design moving forward. So if we're adding a new part of a building a new winery, FM, NFPA, and these other design standards are extremely important for us to give us a foundation of what to expect and how those buildings will perform in a fire. So we rely on them heavily, maybe not necessarily for wildfire aspects, but really for moving forward on not just short term, but looking long term. Where do we need to improve our infrastructure to protect these properties better?
Okay,
Christy?
great. Thank you for that information. I know everybody kind of may or may not be using these type of forms or this type of data, but
Yeah.
if you need some guidance, you can
And
always follow up with us. Go ahead, Tim.
And just so you know, everyone online, Factory Mutual data sheets, they're basically public, and you can access those by going on the Factory Mutual website. The NFPA, now on the other hand, you have to pay for their standards, and unless you're subscribed to their entire library of standards. Just so you're aware of that. And we have access to those all. So while we won't be able to give you a standard, we can certainly help you if you have questions in that regard. So go ahead, Christy, with the.
No, there's one other question that came in. How do you manage water supply for firefighting? Is the water pulled from the municipal water supply, or do you have your own water supplies available, lakes, rivers, that type of thing?
In our vineyards and remote wineries, they are all pulled off either a well or some sort of surface water supply. So one thing that we realize too, now that we're in a drought, some of those reservoir levels aren't as high as they used to be. So if we are pulling off a surface water supply that either feeds directly to a fire pump or system, hydrant, that there's certain wineries and locations that we have to maintain a certain level of water in there, and those have been identified as well. Or does that well and or reservoir supply a water tank to that? And so this is kind of where there's an overlap of that, the code compliance, either FM or NFPA. So what does NFPA say about rural areas of firefighting water? How much do you need? What's expected? And that's where maybe we'll work with a local authority to say, hey, do we need 90 minutes of water, 2 hours? What does that look like? And again, I'd love to get as much water on site. So the answer is that it really personally, where does it depends on the location. But what we've done is obviously work with our local facilities managers, maintenance managers, general managers, and said, hey, these 2 tanks, critical to fire, they have to be maintained at full 100% of the time, and maybe install alarm, low level alarm, things like that we didn't have in place before.
Hey, Brent, so we're kind of running up on the end of our time. I thought maybe as a last question, probably the majority of folks on the call, or organizations, I should say, they're not going to go to the extent of creating a fire brigade. I mean, they don't have that deep of resources. What can they take away from the experience that you have? What are the key things they can do? Maybe 2 or 3 things that they can do to prepare their organizations for potential exposure to wildfire.
Yeah, kind of what I alluded to earlier. Get back to the basics, understand what you have at risk. If you're a municipality, where are your most vulnerable wildfire prone areas? And go look at them and start budgeting for, if you don't have persons to do this type of work, start budgeting for fuel reduction. And what's defensible space is going to be a little, as much as possible. But even today, and in my world of risk and safety consulting, I drive by a building, I see like weeds growing out of the roof and stuff like that. It's really basic stuff. Get on your roofs. What do your roofs look like? That was a big bone of mine when I was on the carrier side. It was like, Do you look at your roofs and look at your drains and see what kind of debris up there, and look at the topography around there? Are you using wood chips against your building? That's a movement. Personally, I'm getting away from in my own home. Is like, have a nice shredded redwood. It looks great, but that stuff's going to burn. So, what does that look like? And again, don't just think of the forest as the spot where these fires can spread. Yes, reduce those fuels, but these fires, they'll jump freeways, and so even if your building is, kind of in the middle of a city. I mean, we saw that in Santa Rosa in 17. Get to the basics, understand what you have at risk in a wildfire prone area, and start working on human element pieces around that, like, fuel reduction, emergency services. What do we have in this property that is vulnerable if we lose power and have a fire? All the above, and an earthquake, all that, and lose water, because
Yeah.
it's water. Water is a real it's an issue, but especially if you're in a rural area, how much water do you have, and how quickly can I get it to my site?
Yeah.
And again, I call it basic risk management, business interruption planning, desktop exercises, things like that. Do those, kind of think through, and if, from my personal experience, working with clients on these type of things, it's a little clunky at first, and that's okay. But I'd rather make mistakes in a desktop exercise than I would, during an actual fire event, and realize, oh, I don't have anybody that knows how to get to the roof and run this HVAC to control our stock.
Yeah.
So that, and then communication with your employees and key vendors and people around that site. Make sure you have a clear line of communication to your employees on, how to, whether they need to come into work, exit, are they safe at home, whatever that looks like for your organization. And lastly, work with your neighbors. If you're in a rural area, get to know your neighbors, see what they're doing, because you're definitely in this together.
Yeah.
And you don't, again, who knows what litigation is going to come out of these fires over the last X amount of years, but you don't want to be that person, that company that started a fire on your property and spread to somebody else's, and you know
Yeah.
where it could have been controlled. So
Well,
again,
thank you,
just
Brent.
understand your risk.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this has been great. I mean, I've enjoyed it. It's always good working with you anyway. And thank you to the people that attended. If there's anything that we can do here at Alliant to help you out, please reach out to us. If you have a question for Brent, to save him getting bombarded by emails, if you want to shoot them to us, and I can forward them. Thanks, Brent. So
Thanks. Good to talk
appreciate
to
it.
everybody again.
Yeah.
Have a great remainder of the summer. Fire free,
Yeah.
COVID free, all the good stuff.
All right now. Have a great one.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great day.
Goodbye.